Okay, so let's see if we can keep answering questions here. You may notice that I went ahead and split our answer because we really had two pieces of information there. We had the country for which country did the most or least, and then we had the dollar amount. So I went ahead and split the dollar value in column M and then the country in column L. I think that'll make it easier to format, make our answers look better. So if you were following the video before this, you notice that I put like USA and then a colon or semicolon and then the dollar amount. And I really shouldn't have done that. I should have put the dollar amount in one column, put the country in the other column. So I went back and cleaned that up. Sorry for the mistake. I'm a real person, and hopefully that helps you to see that when you're creating these pivot tables and answering questions, you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. It doesn't always all work out on the very first try. So let's keep on going here, though. Again, remember what we did. We created our pivot table. We've got each of our product lines across here in columns. We've got each of our countries over here in rows. We've got our sum of our extended price. So we've got how many dollars each country spent in each category. And then we created these two little slicers up here, which are just special types of ways to filter where we don't have to keep going back to our pivot table design. And we're going to see if actually creating those slicers helped us answer some of these questions. We'll hope that it did. So let's go to the next question. Which country did the most dollar sales in vintage cars? So we can get the answer from what we have because vintage cars are right here in column H, and so we could read off of column H and find which country did the most. But if you have to answer a lot of questions like that, sometimes that can kind of set you up for making mistakes. It's like when your pivot table has more information than you need, then it's up to you and your eyes to pick out which piece of information you really want to grab off of there. So here's where using filters or slicers can make our pivot table look a little bit nicer and neater. If I click vintage cars, then what that does is that takes off all the other product categories, and all I have to look at is just vintage cars. I'm going to make sure that I'm sorted from largest to smallest, which I think I may have already was, but now it's really clear and there's not a whole lot of other things that are in my way to figure out that yes, it's the USA was $645,000. So I'm going to bring our answer over. And it was the USA. USA is good to us. All right, how many planes did Italy order? So again, let's think about that. How many planes did Italy order? So we're not interested in vintage cars anymore. We're interested in planes, and we're interested only in Italy. And I got to be careful here because if I just pull my number off, 90,000. But let's hover over that 90,000 and see what it says. That's the sum of the extended price. And the question didn't ask us how many dollars worth of planes. It had said how many planes. So we need to change the design of our pivot table. We don't want extended price to answer this question. This question, we want to know the quantity ordered. And so now when we think about what this table is showing us, it tells us that just for Italy and just for planes, the sum of the quantity ordered, so how many planes did they order, was 1,122. So that looks like the question that was asked. And I'm going to go ahead and put that answer since it's a number. I'm going to put it over there in column M. So how many planes did Italy order? 1,122 planes. Our next question asked us who ordered the fewest ships, not including 0. So there may have been some countries that ordered no ships. And we just want to know, well, who ordered at least one ship, but the fewest of those ships. So let's think about our slicer. We don't want to see just Italy anymore. And we don't want to see planes, we want to see ships. And go back and make sure who ordered the fewest ships. So let's think about, do we want the sum of the quantity or do we want the extended price? We want quantities, right? And I think we want to sort this guy. from largest to smallest. And we want to see, well, there's Germany ordered 55 ships from us. And again, this is a company that makes models. They don't make real boats. If somebody ordered 55 ships, that'd probably be a pretty good business. But maybe only 55 model ships maybe isn't such a great idea. Whoops, I think I didn't grab it over here. So we're going to copy that answer of 55. And that was Germany. Okay, how many orders did Hanji Gifts place for vintage cars? How many orders? So let's see. Any country, because it's asking for Hanji Gifts. And if we go back to our raw data and look, we'll see that that's a customer. That's not a country. And we are interested only in vintage cars. But I have countries here, so we've got to change our table quite a bit here. We don't want countries right now. We want the customer and the customer name in particular. But I got all these customers here. I could put a slicer in and I could filter for the customer. But this is an example where I think there was only one question that was asking us about the customer. It may not be worth the time to throw a slicer in there. I'm just going to filter from right here. And so I don't want all my customers. I only want to see this customer called Hanji Gifts. So we're looking at Hanji Gifts, but let's think about it. They wanted to know how many orders. So let's look at the question. How many orders did Hanji Gifts place for vintage cars? So we don't want the sum of those orders. We want to know how many times they placed an order. So we want to count those orders. So now what we see is that Hanji Gifts placed 8 orders for vintage cars. All right, what was the average number of units ordered from Sweden on motorcycles? So here we go. We'll go back to our pivot table, and we don't care about customer name anymore. One thing we want to do is we want to take our filter off for customer name. We want to look at everybody again. But now we're back to the country. And so we're interested in Sweden and motorcycles and the average number of units on an order. So let's see if we can use our slicer here. We're only interested in motorcycles. We're only interested in Sweden. We've got to look how our pivot table is created. They didn't ask us how many orders. We wanted to know the average. So when Sweden buys motorcycles, on each order, on average, they order 44 motorcycles. And we'll kind of clean that number format up just a little bit. So it looks a little bit nicer. So anytime Sweden orders a motorcycle, motorcycles, they're going to order 44 of them on average with each order. All right, which product line did France order the largest quantity of? So not interested in Sweden. Now we're just want to see France. We want to see all our different product lines. Let's see, is it average? Let's look at our question again, make sure we know what they're asking us. How many, which product line did France order the largest quantity of? So we're not talking about an average anymore. We're back to the sum. And we're not looking at dollars. We want to sum up the quantities. So if we look at classic cars, 3,540. All right, which product line did Singapore place the largest single order for? All right, so now we're looking at Singapore, all the different product lines, and we want to know in terms of the quantity ordered, was the biggest quantity they ever ordered. All right, so let's use our slicer to help us out. We only want to look at Singapore. We want all the different product lines. Got to make sure our pivot table is designed the right way. We don't want the sum of the order quantity. We want the very biggest order that they ever placed for anything. And what I see is vintage cars over here. They had an order for 61 vintage cars. So that was the single biggest order that they placed. 61 and vintage cars. All right, we're almost done. We're sort of working this pivot table pretty well. And our slicer is pretty helpful because it really makes us fast to filter our data so that we really only see the data that helps us answer the question that's being asked. So a couple more. Let's see. Vintage cars are what percent of Japan total dollars in orders? So, all right, I know one thing is that I don't want order quantity anymore. I want that extended price again. And when they're talking about totals, they want the sum. So there we go. And let's make sure we know what they're asking us. Vintage cars, what percent of Japan's total dollars? All right, so I only want Japan, and I only want vintage cars. Oh, but wait a minute. Because I want to know vintage cars are what percent of Japan's total orders. So I do want to see everything. And I need to change the way my table is designed, though, because instead of show value as dollar amounts, I want to show values as a percent of a row total. So I look across the row and I say, all right, for Japan, of all the dollars they spent, what percent came from each category? And now we see that vintage cars are 15.11% of the total dollars that Japan spent with us. And UK represents what percent of the total plane dollars. So I'm interested in UK, and I'm interested in planes. So let's think, this might be the same way. Represents what percent of total plane dollars. That means I'm wanting to see planes. And I want to see all my countries, though. Because if I want to get a percentage, I want my percentage to run down this way. I want to add up to 100% for a column. So let's change how we got our table design. Instead of show value as a percent of a row total, on percent of a column total. And so now I'm going to see sort of who my big buyers are of planes. And I see that UK bought 4% of the planes that we sold. Okay, and there we go. Now we've got our questions answered. So we had one pivot table and a couple of slicers, but we kept manipulating our pivot table, redesigning it to show us different pieces of information to answer the question that we were asked, or using our slicers to filter our information so that we only saw the information to answer the question that we were asked. So that's pretty common, that we have one data set but a whole bunch of questions that can be answered, and that's sort of the beauty of having a large data set and being able to create a pivot table, is that you can answer a whole lot of questions with just one data set. So I hope that helped out. Hope that gives you some practice designing pivot tables and manipulating them and using your slicers to answer all the types of questions that people are going to have. So we'll have an assignment that's very similar to this. Hope this helps, and if you got any questions, just let me know.